The bulletin caught my eye as I stepped onto the street, its bold letters screaming, "Community Safety Initiative, join the Watchers," like a dagger through the morning calm. My stomach churned. It feels like propaganda. But around me, my neighbors nod along as if this is perfectly normal, perfectly safe. I glanced around, pulse quickening. Neighbors I've known for years, people who've shared barbecues and block parties with me, are reading it with expressions I can't quite place. Fear masked as approval, compliance masquerading as enthusiasm. Their faces tell stories, their voices won't dare whisper. Heart pounding, I hurry home and flick on the TV, seeking answers, but finding only more questions. The same slogan fills the screen, but now it's a news anchor delivering the message. Her smile too perfect, too rehearsed to trust.
Sign-ups are mandatory,
She chirped, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness.
Together, we can protect our nation from un-American activities.
The words clawed at my chest, leaving invisible scars. Through my window, I spotted Karen walking her dog. Karen, who used to borrow cups of sugar and watch my house when I was away. She paused to chat with another neighbor, their heads bent close, fingers pointing accusingly at a house down the street. The gesture sent shivers down my spine. A drone whirred past overhead, its mechanical buzz cutting through the afternoon quiet like a warning. I closed the curtains with trembling fingers, my hand shaking as I reached for my phone. Should I text someone about what's happening? Or would that mark me as suspicious? The uncertainty paralyzing me. Later in the day, an envelope was delivered in my mailbox. Inside, a letter bearing the Watchers logo glared up at me. Mandatory orientation. Failure to comply will result in penalties. My chest tightened as I read each word, each threat barely veiled beneath official letterhead. When I looked up, Karen waved from her yard, her eyes sharp as broken glass. I forced a smile that felt like betrayal and retreated inside, the letter clenched in my sweating hand, its edges cutting into my palm. The orientation room buzzed with nervous energy, packed with faces I've known for years but suddenly can't trust. A stern man in a crisp suit, too crisp, too perfect, outlined the rules with clinical precision. Observe, report, protect. Each word fell like a hammer blow.
Be vigilant.
He commanded, his voice echoing off the walls.
Suspicion is enough. Do your duty.
I glanced at Karen, who's nodding enthusiastically, drinking in every word like poison, masquerading as medicine. I sink lower into my seat, trying to disappear. Walking home, the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on me. Karen caught up, her footsteps too quick, too eager.
Exciting, isn't it?
She said, her smile stretched too wide, voice pitched too high. I nodded weakly, clutching the Watcher's handbook they handed out. It feels heavier than paper should, as if weighted down by the darkness of its purpose. The next morning, Karen is waiting in her yard when I take the trash out. She's never cared about my schedule before. Her wave is exaggerated, her smile wide but wrong, like a mask that doesn't quite fit. Her phone is in her hand, camera aimed casually, too casually, toward me.
Good morning.
She called out, her voice carrying an edge that wasn't there before. I nodded and turned quickly, my hands shaking as I dropped the trash into the bin. Her gaze burned into my back, leaving invisible scorch marks on my skin. Later, walking to the store, I noticed a man I've seen around but never spoken to. He sat on a bench, notepad in hand, scribbling furiously. Children playing nearby, their innocent laughter a stark contrast to his predatory focus. My stomach churned as I watched him watch them. I paused, conscience warring with self-preservation. Should I say something? Do something? Instead, I hurried past, pulling my hood tighter, shame mixing with relief as I escaped the uncomfortable scene. That night, the hum of drones filled the air like mechanical mosquitoes, their red lights blinking like malevolent stars. One hovered near my house for a little too long, its lens staring directly at me through the gap in my curtains. My heart raced as I imagined what it's seeing, what it's reporting. I closed the curtains tightly, but the feeling of being marked, of being watched, is seeping through the fabric like smoke. A knock at the door sent me into panic mode. My heart was threatening to burst from my chest. My first panicked thought was, they've come for me. This is it. I opened the door cautiously, keeping the chain still latched, to find Mr. Bell, the neighborhood watch leader, standing on the other side of the door. His presence did nothing to calm my racing pulse or tattered nerves.
Just checking in.
He smiled tightly, his eyes flickering past me to scan my living room like searchlights.
Anything unusual to report?
He stepped closer as I shook my head, invading my space.
We all have a role to play.
His tone carried a threat wrapped in civic duty. The next morning, Karen cornered me by the mailbox, her body blocking my escape route.
I saw the drones by your place last night.
Her voice was low but pointed like a knife. They're everywhere, I replied, trying to sound casual, but I heard the tremor in my voice. Karen narrowed her eyes, studying me like a specimen under glass.
You're paying attention, right? You don't want to miss anything, or be mistaken for something you're not.
My mouth went dessert dry at the implied threat. Her meaning crystallized like ice in my veins. That night, the silence in my house felt oppressive, crushing me under its invisible weight. I sat in the dark, scrolling through today's Watcher reports on my phone, each one more absurd than the last. Suspicious gardening, foreign conversations, children playing too long in one place. The absurdity of it made me want to scream, but I bit down on the urge. I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling, listening to the eternal hum of the drones outside. The Watchers are always watching, always waiting. The morning light brought chaos to our neighborhood. I woke to shouting. My breath fogged the cold morning air as I peered through the blinds. Mrs. Harris's house, the cozy cottage with flower beds she tended daily, was swarming with uniformed men. They moved with precision, breaking her door down and storming inside with practiced efficiency. Seconds later, they emerged, dragging Mrs. Harris out. She clutched at her robe, her slippers flopping off as she stumbled. I turned, startled to see Karen standing on her porch, phone raised high, recording everything with an expression of dark satisfaction.
They found her reading banned books.
Karen whispered, her eyes gleaming with something that made my skin crawl. Books? The word scraped out of my throat like broken glass. Karen didn't answer, too busy documenting Mrs. Harris's destruction. Around her, neighbors are gathering like vultures, their faces a disturbing mix of fear and fascination. Mrs. Harris's voice broke through the morning air, raw with betrayal.
I baked cookies for you. I babysat your kids, please.
Her sobs echoed off the brick walls as they pushed her into the waiting van. I wanted to run to her, to stop this madness, but my feet wouldn't move. I was frozen, a coward bearing witness to this absurdity. The men ignored her pleas, slamming the van doors with finality. They drove away, leaving nothing behind but the lingering scent of her beloved gardenias and the shattered trust of her neighbors. I turned back to Karen, voice barely a whisper. Books. Karen pivoted slowly towards me, her movement deliberate as a predator's.
You're not defending her, are you?
Her gaze pierced mine, cold and calculating, measuring my reaction. No, I stammered, the lie bitter on my tongue. Karen's smile appeared gradually, like frost forming on a window, but it never reached her eyes. She clicked off her recording with a sound like a gunshot and walked away, each step precise and meaningful. I watched her disappear into her house, but her look stayed with me, haunting my thoughts. That mixture of suspicion and pity chilled me more than the cool morning air. Around me, neighbors whispered like conspirators, pointing at Mrs. Harris's empty house as if it's become contaminated.
She had it coming.
One muttered, voice thick with false righteousness.
She must have known better,
says another, fear masked as judgment. Their words cut like knives, transforming our once peaceful block into a minefield of betrayal. Later that day, I forced myself to walk past Mrs. Harris's house. The door hung broken, its frame splintered like our community's trust. Her flower beds, once pristine, lie trampled, petals scattered across the lawn like tears. I stopped, staring at the destruction, at a life erased overnight, and wondered, will mine be next? The afternoon brought new horrors. A Watcher van parked at the end of our street, like a predator waiting to strike. I watched through trembling blinds as they dragged David, the teenager who mowed our lawns and brightened our days with his smile, from his home. His mother's screams pierced the air like physical things.
They said he vandalized the bulletin boards.
She wailed from the porch, her voice breaking. David didn't fight back. He just kept repeating,
I didn't do it.
Like a broken record. His voice grew fainter with each step. I couldn't sleep that night. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing with continuous Watcher alerts, each one a new accusation, suspicious activity reported on Elm Street. The Potential vandal spotted near Maine. The notifications blurred together in a symphony of paranoia. Each buzz sent electricity through my nerves. I wanted to throw the phone across the room but couldn't risk appearing suspicious. What if they're watching even now? The next morning, Karen was waiting for me. She stood in my yard like a statue. Her arms are crossed, her smile sharp enough to draw blood.
You haven't filed a single report, Alex.
Her voice casual, but eyes were burning with accusation. I haven't seen anything, I reply, hearing my voice crack like thin ice. Karen tilted her head, studying me like a scientist observes a specimen.
Really? You're always paying attention though, right? Or are you hiding something?
My pulse raced like a trapped animal. No, of course not. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a threat.
Good. Because only patriots have nothing to fear.
Her smile widened, colder than winter, as she turned and walked away, leaving me frozen in place. The Watchers aren't the only threat anymore. Karen's eyes held the promise that she can be just as dangerous. By lunch, whispers followed me like shadows. Neighbors who once shared friendly daily greetings now avoided my gaze as if I were infected. Karen's words echo in my mind like a warning bell. Had she said something? Did they suspect me? I caught Mrs. Bell peeking through her curtains at me, ducking away when our eyes meet. The street felt emptier than ever, yet at the same time somehow more crowded with unseen eyes. That night, I opened the Watcher app, my finger hovering over the report suspicious activity button. A name came to mind, Karen. Always watching, always judging. But I hesitated. Hand was trembling. Reporting her would mean fully embracing this new world of betrayal. I closed the app instead, choosing silence over survival. I hadn't expected him to return, but there he was, standing in front of my house, David. He just stood there, a ghost of his former self. His face was drawn and pale, eyes vacant like empty windows. He looked at me, through me, then he passed by with slow, mechanical steps. No smile, no nod, just a hollow stare. He was different now, as if the life had been leached out of him. The next night, I saw him again. But David wasn't alone. He was walking with the Watchers, 3 of them in uniform, their eyes scanning every corner. His head was down, his hands at his sides, a mechanical obedience in his every move. I ducked behind a tree, my breath caught in my throat like a trapped bird. They had broken him, remade him into their idea of the perfect American. I found myself sitting across from Karen the next day, my hands trembling as I stirred my coffee. She didn't waste time.
They re-educated him,
she said, leaning back in her chair, her smile unsettlingly calm.
Now he's an asset, a good one.
Her words sent a chill down my spine. They turn people into tools? I whispered, horror creeping into my voice. My heart pounded against my ribs like it wanted to escape. They weren't just removing people, they were transforming them into something inhuman. The thought clung to me like a weight. It was all part of a bigger picture, and I was caught in it. Karen's voice cut through my panic.
Speaking of assets,
she said, her eyes narrowing to slits.
You've been flagged as inactive.
Her next words were blunt.
If you want to stay safe, I'd suggest filing a report, just one. Show you're committed.
Her voice carried no empathy, just a cold, unwavering certainty of what must be done. I swallowed hard past the lump in my throat. One report could mean survival or damnation, but I couldn't be sure anymore. Her eyes didn't leave mine as she stood to leave, her presence lingering like a threat. I sat there, alone. The coffee grew cold, my hands shaking like leaves in a storm. The thought of filing a report twisted my insides. But Karen was right. If I didn't, I'd be next. My phone buzzed again, another alert piercing the silence. I closed my eyes, knowing I had to choose. I couldn't take it anymore. The tension had been building, squeezing my chest, and now the weight was unbearable. The report. I would file just one. I had to. Mr. Bell was the perfect target, an easy choice. The rumors around him had already spread. His odd behavior making him the perfect scapegoat. I typed the report quickly, each word tasting like acid. Mr. Bell has been meeting strangers at odd hours. It wasn't true, but it didn't matter. The system was made to pit neighbor against neighbor, not to create safe communities, as the propaganda claimed. The next morning, I saw the results. Mr. Bell's house was empty, just dark windows staring like accusing eyes. No movement, no life. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He's gone. I did this. I destroyed someone's life with a few keystrokes and a lie. I felt sick to my stomach. A part of me had died in that moment. I'm no different from the others now, no better than Karen. I walked past Mr. Bell's house several times that day, each step heavier than the last. Guilt gnawed at my conscience like a hungry rat. But it wasn't guilt I felt now. It was fear. Fear of being watched. Fear of being next. The watchers weren't just watching Mr. Bell. They were watching all of us, including me. Karen's words haunt me.
Because only patriots have nothing to fear.
Karen wasn't subtle anymore. She watched me constantly, her gaze following like a predator tracking wounded prey. I caught staring more than once, eyes sharp with suspicion and something darker. Every time I turned around, there she was, always close enough to hear my breathing, to catch any whispered dissent. It didn't take long for me to realize the truth. Karen isn't just watching anymore. She's hunting me. That night, I hear them. The watchers were circling my house like wolves, their footsteps deliberate and menacing. Through the blinds, I spot two of them across the street, their eyes scanning windows for any sign of movement. I couldn't breathe. Every movement, every sound felt like it could expose me for some false reason. I was trapped. And they knew it. I couldn't escape it. The watchers circled every night now, waiting for me to make a mistake. And Karen? She was still too close, her presence a constant reminder of impending doom. The constant surveillance had shattered any sense of peace I once had, my sense of self. I was no longer a part of the neighborhood. I wasn't even part of myself anymore. I had given in to the paranoia. David found me in the park just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows stretching long and ominous. His eyes were wide, frantic. He slipped something into my hand, a small drive.
Proof.
He whispered urgently, glancing around like a hunted animal. Proof of what? My voice barely a whisper, as if the trees might be listening.
It's not just us.
David said, tension vibrating through every word.
They're targeting anyone who resists. You have to expose them.
I stared at the drive, my heart thundering in my chest. Expose them? The thought terrified me. They would come for me. They would tear apart everything I am. They'll come for me, I whisper, more to myself than David. His eyes hardened with a newfound strength.
They will anyway,
he said, a cold truth ringing in every word.
You can't hide anymore.
I swallowed hard, decision weighing like lead in my stomach. Exposing them means the end of my everything, my life, my safety, gone in an instant. But silence makes me complicit in their evil. Silence makes me one of them. Back at home with trembling fingers, I plugged the drive into my laptop. The screen flickered to life like an opening eye. There was no turning back now. The footage loaded on the screen, and I was hit with a flood of images. Neighbors spying on each other, accusing and reporting in the dead of night. Each image hit like a physical blow. People dragged from their homes, faces twisted in terror. Some returned changed, re-educated into hollow shells. Others vanished completely, leaving only questions and fear. My hands shook as I scrolled through the evidence. It's worse than my darkest nightmares. It wasn't just the watchers. They were a tool, a weapon, transforming our community into a web of paranoia and punishment. The entire system had become a hub of surveillance, accusation, and punishment. I had to expose this. I had to. Suddenly, a loud crash shattered the silence as my windows shattered, shards of glass raining down like deadly snow. The sound tore through the night's silence like a gunshot. Blinding lights flooded my home, turning night to burning day. My eyes watered, my vision swam. A cold metallic voice boomed through hidden speakers.
Step away from the computer, now!
My heart pounded against my ribs like it wanted to break free. They're here. They found me. I didn't hesitate. With trembling fingers, I click upload. The progress bar crawled painfully slow across my screen, each percentage point an eternity as drones hovered closer, their mechanical whirring growing louder. Then more sounds joined the chaos. The sound of distant boots marching towards my door, radio static shouted commands. They're coming. The upload bar reached 99% as my door began to splinter under heavy blows. Then I hear it, the soft chime of completion just as my door burst open. Time seemed to stop. The drone's whirring grows deafening, closing in. My breath caught in my throat, panic rising like a tide. There's nowhere left to run, nowhere to hide. A voice cut through my terror, low, urgent, familiar.
Alex, get out now!
I froze. My heart stuttered. It couldn't be. But there he stood in the shadows, a ghost made flesh. Mr. Bell. The man I betrayed. The man I thought was gone forever. What's going on? My whisper sounded pathetic, small against the growing chaos.
They're coming for you. Run.
My legs felt like lead, frozen in place.
They'll get us both if you don't move. Now, trust me.
His voice carried the weight of steel, of secrets I couldn't begin to understand. The drone's buzzing intensified, pressing against my eardrums like physical pain. Mr. Bell stepped forward, pulled something metallic from his coat, a device I've never seen before, a jammer. The instant he activated it, the room fell silent, as if the world itself has paused to catch its breath. I blinked, eyes wide, my mind racing to process what I'm seeing. How? Mr. Bell's face was a mask carved from stone. Whatever he's seen, whatever he's endured, has left marks deeper than physical scars.
Doesn't matter. You've got 5 seconds.
Understanding for the situation clicked into place. 5 seconds. 5 seconds to choose between certain capture and desperate flight. Without another word, I spun and bolted for the back door, each heartbeat a drum in my chest. The watchers' voices carry from outside, their boots hitting pavement in rhythmic thuds. They're so close I can almost feel their breath on my neck. I burst through the door into the alley, night air thick as syrup in my lungs. My mind raced through possible escape routes, each one seeming more impossible than the last. Glancing back, I caught one last glimpse of Mr. Bell's silhouette framed in the doorway, already fading into shadow like a dream.
Go,
he mouthed, the word barely carrying to my ears. I didn't stop to question, didn't stop to think. I turned the corner at full speed, my feet pounding against the concrete. Pursuit echoed behind me. They won't let me escape. They can't afford to. But I couldn't look back now. I couldn't hesitate. A familiar voice stopped me cold, soft, almost gentle.
Alex.
Karen stood at the alley's end, her eyes wide with something I've never seen before. Fear? Regret? Humanity?
Don't run,
she pled, her voice trembling.
You'll get caught. Come with me.
Words failed me. What could I possibly say to the woman who helped build this nightmare? The watcher's footsteps grew louder, closing in. I couldn't think. I could barely breathe. Karen, what are you doing here? The words scraped out of my throat. She stepped closer, arm half raised as if to reach for me.
They'll kill you.
Her voice cracked with what almost sounded like genuine concern. I can't. My voice cut through my panic like a blade. I have to keep going. They're not gonna stop. They'll never stop. I didn't wait for her response. Couldn't afford to. I turned and ran, leaving her and everything else behind. The watchers drew closer with every step. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. All that mattered was getting away, getting the truth out. The footage spread like wildfire, jumping from screen to screen, platform to platform. But the fear spread faster. People reacted in ways I never expected. Some rose up, finding the courage to resist, but most retreated deeper into terror, turning on their neighbors with renewed vigor, as if betrayal might save them. The divide grew deeper each day. Truth-tellers become targets, hunted through the streets they once called home. The silent majority survived by keeping their heads down, eyes averted, and mouths shut. I became a ghost in my own life. One night here, another night there. I avoided people. Avoid the eyes that might remember my face, that might trade it for safety. The watchers will never tire. They've come close sometimes, too close. But I learned to slip away like smoke, like shadow. It felt like running from phantoms, except these phantoms wear uniforms and carry weapons and never, ever stop hunting. Each night, I lay awake listening for drone engines, for boots on pavement, for the whispered reports of neighbors turned into informants. But I didn't regret it, couldn't regret it. In the darkness, the truth becomes my only companion. Someone had to expose the system's rot before it devoured us all, even if that exposure cost me everything I once was. The world teetered on madness's edge now. Former friends became informants overnight. Reports flooded the system. Neighbor accusing neighbor, friend betraying friend, family turning against family. Whether the information was true or not, I heard the whispers about people I once trusted, people who once called me a friend, now wearing watcher uniforms, enforcing rules they once despised. Paranoia infects everything like a virus. Trust becomes a memory, replaced by constant suspicion. Nobody feels safe, not even from themselves. One night, hiding in yet another temporary shelter, I wrote by candlelight, my hand shaking as I recorded what we've become. When neighbors become enemies, freedom dies in silence. I closed my journal, the words heavy with the truth. There's no returning to what we were. Standing at the window, I stared into the empty streets that once held block parties and children's games. The surface looks peaceful now, silent, clean. But I know better. The fight isn't over. Won't be over as long as the Watchers exist, as long as fear rules our hearts and suspicion poisons our minds. I stared into the darkness, feeling my resolve hardened in my chest like armor. I might have lost this battle, might have lost my home and my life. But the war for truth, for freedom, for humanity itself, that war has only begun. And I'll keep fighting, keep running, keep exposing their lies, until the Watchers fall, or until they finally catch me. Either way, I'll never stop fighting for the truth. I'll never stop fighting for us all.